you know,
just submit this
right,
hearing?
you know.
I'll have to check it.
I'd like to call to order the work session for the Mayor and City Council for the month of December and ask Councilmember Fuller to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. You're welcome.
Welcome, everyone. I ask you to kind of excuse my voice tonight. I've had a bit of a cold the last couple of weeks. And, I'm about over it. At least I hope I'm about over it. But I'm still a little gravelly, so but we think we can get through it. First item of business tonight is the review of the minutes for December 7th and December 13th meetings. Anyone care to any comments regarding the minutes? Are they any additions or corrections that we may need?
No, sir.
All right, I'll be up for approval on Monday night. We have time at the beginning of the meeting to entertain any comments that anybody might have on items that do not appear on the agenda. Would anyone care to speak to us tonight?
Barbara Heltebrado, 435 East Baltimore Street. Yes, I just would like to thank the committee and the town for putting up the beautiful Christmas decorations. I love, love, love those snowflakes. They are gorgeous.
They are very nice.
You drive to Littlestown, they have snowflakes, and they're pretty, but ours are brighter, and they really look nice. And I was also told there are decorations down at the football field, down along the drive to the football field. So I don't know, Judy, were you in charge of that?
Well, we're working on it. It's not done yet, but we're still getting
but
there.
it's very, very nice. And on a more somber point, I just think it'd be nice to say something about our President Bush, who died the other day. He was a great leader and a wonderful statesman and a very kind and gentle soul. And he's really the last of a breed like that. And he will certainly be missed for our country.
Here, here.
Here, here.
Marvin Flickinger, 80 East Baltimore Street, Taneytown. Yeah, I'm interested in the fact that you said the brighter. That's what I'm going to bring up. Those of us that live along the street here in the businesses, we all have windows that kind of get filthy from the traffic and so forth. You can't see out unless you wash them, keep them clean. Now, we were very proud of our street lights when they put them up, but I don't know whether they thought the maintenance should be done to those things periodically. They cleaned the globe in front of my house when they put up Christmas decorations. And now I could sit out there on the step and read the newspaper. That's the way it was when they first put them up. You go across the street where it's pretty filthy. I guarantee you couldn't read a newspaper on it. I think there ought to be periodic maintenance on those things to clean those globes. And if you take notice on the bottom of the poles, the paint's starting to peel off, scrape off somehow, but the snow removal they've done, I don't know, but that's the way it is. So I'm suggesting that the council have a maintenance program and do that. Do I think they should be cleaned every week? Definitely not. But you're not getting what you're paying for if the light don't get out of them globes. So
I agree.
Give that some thought.
Right on.
Well, Mayor, if I could mention that I think that we're looking at getting all of those fixtures also updated to the LED lights. So as they do them, I'm sure that they're probably going to.
I think these are already LED.
Are they all LEDs already? No, I thought
We
no.
ought to remind them
No,
in
not
case
the
they're
same
not
kind.
doing them.
They have the bulbs that you have to screw in that they change a lot. So they're looking to change those to the other ones too.
As far as the bases, I was very disappointed in the fact that those bases are flaking like they are. I had said something to the manufacturer when I saw their representatives down at MML conference. It wasn't this year, it was last year. So it's been 2 years that I've noticed it. And they're manufactured right up here in Littlestown. And basically they told me, well, not much they can do about it. I always thought there was some kind of warranty claim. That was my point. He said, you just got to paint them, that's all. So I guess that's something we got to do, is we got to paint them. But I just felt they should have lasted longer than they did. And I guess throwing salt and snow up against them for 3 or 4 years is going to take its toll. So I don't know what, maybe my expectations are a little beyond reality. I don't know. So, but you're right. Anyone else care to make any comments? Thank you for mentioning President Bush. I meant to do that myself and didn't. We got word that just from Sergeant Justice, just as I was sitting down, that we also lost Mel Diggs, who was our police chief for several years, a number of years back. And also was informed that our own chief, Bill Tyler, is celebrating 25 years today with the city of Taneytown. So kind of a lot of things like that going on. So that's good news. So I'm going to try to have Bill come on Monday night and get some official recognition if I could talk him into it. He's kind of bashful, you know. I like to do that.
I've never heard him described as bashful in my life.
No, I know what you mean. Self-effacing, maybe that's what. All right, I need to ask council if there's any conflicts of interest that appear on tonight's agenda.
No, sir.
No.
Sir.
Everybody okay? All right, on Monday night, we'll be introducing an ordinance 07-2018, which is a correction in the zoning map. And you want to comment on that? You've had the information in your packet, but maybe give us some background on what happened there.
Sure, and I'll try to do it by describing the large map up there on the easel. The new map will incorporate areas that have been annexed to the city since the last zoning map was updated in following our 2010 comprehensive plan and comprehensive rezoning. So the large green area to the north, that's the Bollinger Park area that we annexed. On Stumptown Road, you probably can't see it at a distance, but in the one in your packet, they're circled. There were the 3 properties that were annexed due to their failing septic systems a couple years ago. So those will be included in the new map. And then there is a correction to a small number of properties on Mill Avenue on the railroad side tracks of Mill Avenue. Those properties were listed as downtown business on the land use map, and we failed to update them on the zoning map when we adopted the zoning map in 2010. So while we were doing the new map to incorporate the properties we'd annexed, we wanted to correct that omission from the 2010 comprehensive rezoning.
Okay. Any questions about the zoning map? That'll be up for introduction.
Oh, just one quick question. I mean, the shading differences in the colors of the map doesn't affect anything that we have currently zoned, right? Like, we didn't base zoning off of the map colors, we based it off of...
The properties on Mill Avenue officially are restricted industrial right now because the map was not updated and they were not included in the zoning ordinance back in 2010. So As far as what's on the ground there are some residential rental properties. The code allows wherever there's an existing dwelling, a legally existing dwelling, it's considered a permitted use regardless of whether the zoning changes, underneath it. I've spoken to 4 of the 5 property owners. The only owner I haven't spoken with is Potomac Edison with the substation that's at the end of the street. So everyone's agreeable to the change. It actually may make one of the properties a little more marketable, the old mill property there. There have been no takers for it, with the current industrial zoning, so this may provide some opportunity for that property to redevelop as well. So I think the owner is very supportive of the change.
Are we required to receive citizen comment on these?
There will be a hearing for next month. So we'll introduce this month and public hearing because it is a zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. Ordinance 08, 2018, the amendments to the campaign finance ordinance. And that's in your package. And any comments on that for us to consider?
I have a couple. On the first page, I think that it says the report for every candidate, whether elected or not, shall be filed on the last day of the month. I'd like to add that if the last in which the election was conducted, I'd like to add if that date falls on a Saturday and Sunday, that you could hand it in the next business day. I think that's omitted because some of these deadlines might be over a weekend. So that's the first thing. I think that we should amend that to say the next business day, because when you count the number of days from filing, it might end up on a Saturday or Sunday.
Mr. Mayor, that's already in the code in a separate section. Any filing days that fall on any holidays or weekends are the next business day.
It's already addressed. Okay. Anybody else?
With language on section 2, section 3, under section 2, letter E, the next report of such political committee shall be filed on the last day of the month in which the election was conducted. I'm almost thinking that maybe we need to say the next report of any such political committee, because in my mind, it seems like that language is almost kind of vague by not specifying any such political committee versus such political committee. It almost seems like, to me, there might be some attempt to...
Well, I think in context, because that's taken out of context. Is that correct, Jay?
Right. This is as it reads in the code right now,
Right.
taken out of the section. That's the only part being changed in the political section. The only thing in 1, 2, and 3 that changed from the existing code is it deleted the following month. It used to read on the last day of the month following the election. And so people were saying, is that the end of May or the end of June? Because the month following the election is June. So that got to be cumbersome because it's almost 2 months from the time the election happens until you're going to do it. So just the language of the following month came out so that reports were due at the end of May.
I'm not debating the idea about the month. I'm talking about inserting the word any before such political, so basically an additional amendment to what's already being amended.
Right. So that can be done.
Okay.
If you want it done.
I'd like to know in context, because I'm sure prior to that in there, it talks about the political committee that it's referring to. Is that correct?
Yes. The first section, 18-3, which is not this all, starts with any political committee and goes on and talks about it. And then 18-4 has a laundry list, A, B, C, and D, that start off with the first report, and B starts with the second report, so on and so forth. And so E starts off, as you can see there, the next report of such political committee. So I guess if you read it completely in context, and I'll read the first sentence, the first report of a political committee shall be due within, and then the next one says, a second report of such political committee, and
Right. So in context, it does make sense because it is covered under any and a committee.
All right, I just want to make sure that
You
we're
could read
being
it,
specific
and if it
enough.
needs to be done, I mean, it can be, that's a minor thing, but.
Right.
I just want to make sure we're being specific enough.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? In section 4, Mr. Mayor, it says, it's under a section entitled Failure to Report, and it says, for the purposes of the chapter, the political committee or individual must file a timely report, and then it goes on to talk about that. And then it says the last sentence, the Ethics Commission may impose fines and penalties for incomplete or correct reports which are filed. I think it's been customary in past local elections to allow the person to know they were in violation of the code so they could make corrections. So I'd suggest adding the words after given a chance to make corrections, which would mean if the Ethics Commission finds an incompletion or a mistake or an error or a question, that a person would have one chance to do that before they would go immediately to fining a person. It's the way it's worded now, it just says may impose penalties if a mistake is made or an incomplete report is filed. It's not easy to file lots of government forms, and mistakes are made. To err is human, and I'd like to add the words on Monday after given a chance to make corrections to the end of the last sentence of section 4, which would require them to notify and give a time period for them to make corrections. Also on section 18.9, restrictions on campaign contributions, I think the wording here is very tedious about the $500 exemption if you're self-funded. And so I would like to change this section on Monday to say that all candidates, whether self-funded or not, have to spend their money through a checking account. It says that you don't have to have a checking account if you sign an affidavit that you're not going to exceed $500. But I think that the goals that the Ethics Commission have been, in meetings I've been to, is to have transparency on where the money comes from and how it is expended. And so I would change the word to say all candidates must do all contributions and expenditures through a campaign checking account. I think that's a new thing to use a campaign checking account, but it makes exemptions for self-funding people, and I don't think that's appropriate. The problem is section 6B, unless a person, you could have an affidavit that says, I'm running for office and I won't spend anything, and then you wouldn't have a checking account, but I don't think self-funding people should be exempt from transparency. We could correct that on Monday. Also on section 6, Mr. Mayor, suggests that all candidates would run those transactions through a checking account. I had a comment on sections 18 also. If I could just, it says, any and all documentation. I think that's awfully broad. Let's see if I can find the words in the sentence here. It says that if a person fails to comply, that the Ethics Commission would have the power to receive any and all documentation. I thought that was pretty broad because the whole purpose of this section has to do with campaign funding, contributions, and expenditures. I think their power to investigate matters, which is the word that's used here, should just be restricted to financial documentation related to the campaign.
Well, it says related to the purposes of this chapter. I mean, that right there is campaign finance.
But it says that they have the ability to request documentation and disclosures about any matter and investigate matters. I just thought that was awfully broad.
Right, and you're leaving out the most important part of that. Let's start from the beginning. Further, the Ethics Commission shall be empowered to request and receive any and all documentation from those regulated under this chapter to support, substantiate, or investigate matters related to the purposes of this chapter. That's the most important part. That is the the restriction on them. You know, they can't ask you for, you know, a copy of your Amazon order of underwear. They're going to ask you for things related to campaign finance.
Right, related to campaign finance and the campaign that you filed.
Related to the purposes of this chapter covers that completely.
And I don't also agree with a $500, is that already in the law? Has that been added through this?
No,
It's already in the
it's
law.
been there.
Yep.
If I could give some background that might shed some light on some of these and
That's
the
a
ideas.
huge number.
As you recall, the prior discussions focused on setting an exemption for people who said, I'm only going to spend my own money and I'm only going to spend it a certain amount. And we tried to carve out some type of exception for that. So the councilman's correct. There was an exception carved out for that. And that we were going to have people state that I am not going to spend more than $500. And that worked until we actually had the election, and now we learned that, well, there was a loophole here that we have to fix. And the situation occurred where somebody started the election saying, I'm not going to spend more than $500 of my own money. But then, as the election cycle went on, accepted contributions. So they said, from now on, I'm going to file all the necessary forms because I'm accepting contributions. And the first, I'll call it $500, but the first piece was not really accounted for well because it didn't run through a campaign account. Whereas if you started from the very get-go and collecting money and saying you're collecting money, you had to run everything through a campaign account. So there was that problem with that $500 piece. And so one of the major changes of the law is in 18-18. And it's a major change in the paradigm. It says if you elect to do self-funding and don't spend more than $500, that's it. You can't accept contributions. You can't change your mind. You can't later get things. So you're getting the exemption, and the exemption is simply, from what Councilman Frazier is correct, using the campaign account. You still have to file all the forms and show how your $500 is spent, but it's assumed that the $500 is your own money. So the exemption is from the campaign account. That's simply it. This is a sweeping change in the fact that it says you elect that, you can't change later. And and that's really probably what we were trying to get at before, so that I'm making this affidavit up front and then I'm bound by it, and there wouldn't be any changing horses in midstream. So that's kind of how the self-funding piece falls into it. If you decide to follow along with that and say every person must have a campaign account, even if you put your own money in it, then there really isn't any need for a self-funding affidavit anymore.
Right.
I mean, which is fine. I mean, that's far more transparent and it's far easier to track. So you take any of your money and you can put it in there.
Well, that's what I'm suggesting.
And you got to also remember that the $500 limit is only a limit for the self-funding. If you wanted to spend $1,000 of your own money, you could do it. You just can't elect self-funding at that point in time. So you see that the self-funding was something worked in there as an exception. And if you want to take it out and do what the councilman says, that would provide more transparency, but we can almost take the self-funding piece out of the entire ordinance because it wouldn't have any effect.
Well, some people like to say they're self-funding their campaigns.
I mean, they can say that, but there's no,
If they had an
there's no
affidavit,
special.
they would be able to say, I chose that path.
Right, but there's no exemptions, in other words. They still have to do.
But still, if you change the word to all campaigns need to use the checking accounts so we can have transparency on that, I think that would take out the confusion about soft money.
And I'm not opposed to that suggestion at all. I think it lends itself better to transparency. My concern is from a practical standpoint, banks are getting extremely restrictive with balances in accounts. And, you know, I'm only going to spend $300. All I'm going to do is buy some signs, but I have to open an account to buy these signs, and then I'm going to have to pay a fee.
Exactly.
Which, do we allow bank fees to be paid out of campaign accounts?
It happened this past time because when the balances get low, or you're dealing with low monies anyway, there was a monthly fee that was assessed.
I know there are some campaign finance things, they don't allow you to do that. You can't use it for bank fees, you have to, whatever. That would be my only concern with that, is when you start talking about those low numbers in a checking account, you're gonna be subject to fees because banks are getting extremely heavy-handed with that sort of thing.
And Jay, I'm sorry, Brad.
No, that's okay. So I'm just saying I like the idea, I support it, except for that practicality aspect where I just don't think it's
Well,
good.
to your point, Councilman Wance, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jay, but from my reading of this, right, if I decide to self-fund, right, I would still be liable to having to provide documentation. I wouldn't be able to make any expenditures in cash. Everything would have to be accountable for. And so there would still be a degree of transparency because I would still have to provide everything that I spent if the...
Yes. And that happened this year as well, is that people said, I'm self-funding under $500, but every time there was a filing due, they had to make the filing, they had to show they were still self-funding, and they had to, the filing, like your tax return, had a Schedule A that had income contribution, so that was blank, had B, which was expenditures, and they had to list what they were. And so, like I said, the exemption that you're really going to allow here is the exemption of the bank account. If you spend more than $500, you can't do the self-funding because you're just regularly putting your own money in there at that point. And then to follow up, kind of related to that, with the documentation and the supportness, that there's things like that was talked about. The Ethics Commission believed it had the power to do that already, because how can you have forms that you can file, just like the IRS, and not be able to ask for the documentation that support those forms? That was questioned. Candidates said, why, where does it say that you can ask for these things? And it's an obvious thing, it's the fact that if you give me your expense reports and I want to see the bank account statement to show that it matches it, that's the only check and balance that you have. And other things that could happen in there would be, I'd like to see copies of the checks to make sure that the check, I mean, you'd see that on a statement if you were provided, but it allows them to do their homework to make things coincide. The problem that happened in the last election was the fact that there were cash transactions, cash expenditures. So receipts were handwritten receipts. And there was no way to balance that with a checking account since they were cash out. And some of the accounts were not checking accounts, they were savings accounts. So most of the transactions came out in cash unless they were cashier's checks. And that just got to be in something where everybody was following along, but now you had a situation where you couldn't do the checks and balances that this is designed to do. So if everybody had a checking account, they wrote checks, they can't pay in cash, then it should all match up at the end. It should be like your checkbook at the end of the month.
And it would be if you change those words
Right.
to all accounts.
The issue is that the self-funding people, we're assuming got $500, and there's no way to check that.
Well, it's not just the exception from the checking account, though, because it would give them exception to requiring them to pay by check, correct?
Right, they would.
So it's not just the exception to having the bank account, it's the whole cash check thing.
Well, they would still have to pay. I mean, right now this says no expenditures can be done in cash. That's the new proposal. So if you spent money on your next election and it was $200 on signs, you would be able to have to document $200, I mean, a check from your personal account. And that's one of the reasons people had concerns was, it's okay, arguably, to have your campaign account information out there because it's public, but do you want your personal check information out there?
The way that it reads, you're going to have the same arguments you had this past time when it says, no campaign expenditure shall be made in cash, period. All expenditures shall be made by check from the campaign account, comma, except as otherwise provided by this chapter and provisions relating to candidates who have filed a self-funding affidavit. They're gonna connect those sentences.
Right.
And they're gonna say, no, I don't have to follow that because I'm self-funding. So whether we need to further clarify or just simply say everything's checking and we're done.
Right.
That's the...
But if you go to the way back when we started this campaign stuff, there was never a self-funding thing. You created that. You wanted that exception. That was something that we put in there and created. No other places have that. I mean, I don't
We're
say
being
no.
kinder than most people are.
Most places, if you're going to do a campaign, you share a campaign account, you can take money out of your own pocket and you put it in the campaign account, and you can call it a loan, so you can get it back at the end, but it's all done with an arm's length business type thing. And that's how this was set up, and then we grafted in this other piece. But we could take that out too. I mean, that's...
And perhaps that's what we need to do. I mean, now that I think we may have gotten a little wiser since then, that we kind of see the flaws in having that, maybe it is time to just say everything goes into a campaign account, and that's the end of it.
That's right. I think it would be really helpful with today's discussion if we had, Mr. Mayor, the normal format for changes in the law, where you have the old law and you have strike-through words that are taken out with a line,
Right.
and add the new words in italics, because it's really hard to tell. Like, I was going to object to the subjective nature of the $500 fine that's found in Section 8. It says fines up to $500. I think violation amounts should not be subjective based on the committee. It would be a certain amount if you violate, if you didn't do the form right, or made a mistake, or didn't correct it. But up to $500 allows the chance for the Ethics Committee to set a high fine against one candidate and a low fine against another candidate. So it's the subjective finding that's found in the Section A is really troublesome to me. It imagines that people would never get frustrated or angry. And you might find a border commission that fines heavily in one circumstance and light in another. So the fines that we allow them to do should be specifically listed in the statute or the ordinance.
We'll never be able to hit every catch-all of what mistakes could be made.
The purpose of an ethics board is to have an impartial board that evaluates circumstances and situations and acts accordingly. So I have no problem at all with having variable fines. Somebody that is blatantly violating the intent of the section should be fined higher than somebody that just made a mistake.
Well, I don't think anybody is completely objective.
Well, the other interesting thing about that point is under Section 4, letter C, that final sentence says the Ethics Commission may impose fines and penalties, with the key word being may.
May.
When I filled out my forms, there was one instance where I believe the commission asked me, because originally we were supposed to initial all the pages, but they couldn't decipher my initial, so they wanted me to write out my entire name, right? So something like that wouldn't be a fine, that'd just be a redo. I did what they asked me to do. I resubmitted the forms, and they were accepted.
Well, I was green as grass, and I had lots of help from the staff in getting those correct the first time out.
Well, right, and so, again, the key word being may. I mean, these are people who are going to be impartial, but they're also going to be kind about this. These are not people who are standing over top of you with a gun saying, do this or else. If you have questions, ask them, and they'll answer them.
Yeah, by having it say...
The key word in Section 4C is materially correct. In other words, if the intent is determined by the commission that it was proper and forthright, then maybe no fine will be levied. On the other hand, if someone messes with the system and it's obvious that that's what's happened, they should be punished for it. I like it the way it is.
I can put some color on that for you as well. Right now, there is no provision for fines, and that's one of the things that they wanted, because there is no way for them to enforce candidates doing things if they just say, well, we're not doing that. And while there was lots of confusion and there was, it was the first time out doing these things, the issue was left after the election, after the last election, with two candidates that they believe they complied, and the ethics board says, no, you haven't. And there's no incentive to continue to bring people back in and correct it if you're not going to give them, if you don't, then this. And it's a lot of time involved. I mean, if you were the candidate, you don't want to do these things unless there's a stick, I guess, to post. So that's what they wanted. This mirrors a lot of the other things of this is the maximum amount that you'll allow, and then they decide, this is what the fine is, like the mayor said.
Don't you see that as subjective and circumstantial?
Well-
One person could have one fine for the same incident, another person another fine?
I wouldn't think.
That's why you have an ethics board.
I think that it's subjective on the part of the ethics board in the fact that they would weigh the circumstances and they could determine their own, saying, we're going to give fines that when you're late, it's $5. Or when you decide you're not going to file it at all, it's $500. Meaning that you could do what the councilman states. You could state as many of the things as you want in here, but the issue becomes, if it's not one of those, do they have the authority to do any fines?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm really concerned about the chilling effect of advertising anew that now it's a $500 fining authority if anybody makes a mistake on a form.
It's that for each violation. Now, here's the problem with having a schedule of fees. You're going to have someone trying to buck the system. They're going to look at that schedule of fees and say, it's a $10 fine. Is it worth just saying, screw you, and I'm going to do it anyway?
Sure.
Or they can look at it and say, it could cost me up to $500. Is it really worth me fighting this battle right now?
I wanna take
It's
a
the
chance.
same thing you're going to find whether it's at any court level. Any of those fines are subjective because it depends on, is the intent there? How severe is the crime or the mistake? How many times have they done this? It has to be subjective. That way you stop the repeat offenses. You stop the big issues. What I'm curious about is you find them $50. Is that the end all be all? They pay their $50. Do they still have to fix the violation? Or is it a per week until violation is remedied or something like that?
Well, at this point in time, they had nothing to go
I
on.
understand.
And so, and I can tell you, they are your appointees. They're citizens of the town, right? Everyone was reasonable in trying to deal with people. No one was ever draconian about saying, you're in violation and this is it, even if they had the power to fine. What they're concerned with is the only other alternative that they kicked around was, if you're not in compliance, then we're going to decertify you as a candidate. I mean, basically say your stuff is not accepted, and if it's not accepted, then you shouldn't be allowed to be on the ballot. And that seems to have huge problems associated with it. And the idea was, well, if we can't do it that way, how can we enforce people to do what they need to do? Everybody complied up until the election, right? Because the election hasn't happened and you don't want an ethics report coming out saying you didn't comply. The problem is that at the end of the election, the only people that really will comply guaranteed is the people that win, because they're elected officials now.
They want to keep their seats, right?
People that lose, what do you do if they don't comply? And it wouldn't be so bad if you just ended. But remember, we're talking about people who go through the scenario of how they wouldn't comply. If they had no money, and they didn't raise any money, they didn't spend any money, how hard is it to fill out any of these forms? So people that have errors in their forms are usually people that had transactions. They could continue the campaign account indefinitely and have to file every year, and the ethics board is basically saying they need some tool to make sure that they do the things that they're supposed to do. I haven't, you can watch the meetings and you can come to the meetings. They really try to work with everybody. And they just feel that their other job, if you take their other hat and put it on, which is reviewing of the financial disclosure forms, the ones that you all fill out, there are penalties in there already for that. So they said, well, we should penalize on this side too if we're doing it. So that's the background. The state law basically does have fines and penalties that apply. And, they set certain amounts. They set, like, if you're late, it's $10 a day, so they have a laundry list for that, and then they set a maximum. But they also have some open-ended ones, too, because they don't know. This is an attempt not to set the fine at $500, but set the cap, so that you don't hear all of a sudden that the ethics board fined somebody $5,000. You're trying to say, I'm giving you this much authority, and if 500 is too much authority, then here's your authority to do.
If Councilman Wance is correct, it does say per infraction. So you could have fines over $500 a specific violation notice, because you could have multiple infractions.
Technically, you could. I mean,
Yeah, I don't trust anybody not to do that. I
Well,
mean,
that's a bigger problem.
but didn't you just say that it says per infraction?
Well, no, and I said that in relation to nowhere does it actually say they're required to fix the violation. It just says they're going to be fined for the violation.
Yeah, it doesn't even say they have a chance. That's why I want to add these words on Monday that says after they're notified and given a chance to make the corrections requested.
Yeah, I don't like adding loopholes into.
That's not a loophole. That's what you say is happening already. It's just codifying it instead of making it seat of the pants fly without law or code, having just trusting people's good nature.
Well, we've had a good conversation, but it doesn't look like we're making much progress.
Well,
I
we're
tell you
making
to
good
read
progress.
in context with this section 18-7, not just what you have in front of you, but the whole 18-7, and we can get you the track changes version. We
That's
have it
great.
in-house.
Thank you very much for that.
That'll be emailed out to you. Check your email. That'll be there. But 18-7 talks about the failure to file a report. You're changing that a little bit. That's dealing with errors and everything. But you see that it basically says people who fail to do this before an election or fail to pay a fine, that's in there, fail to pay a fine, shall not be administered the oath of office if they're elected. So there's penalties for the winners. There's no penalties for the losers. That's the problem here.
In section B, it says these words, any person who willfully violates the provisions of this chapter will be guilty of a misdemeanor. I think that's a very troublesome sentence because who's deciding whether somebody did something deliberately or accidentally?
Well,
It says willfully
that is,
violates the provision of this chapter shall be, and I don't believe the town can issue misdemeanors, only the judicial branch can issue criminal
how that plays out,
misdemeanors.
the first thing that you have to realize is that's in the existing law. That's the only penalty that currently exists in law. It's section A in the existing law, and it
What did you
says
call the version that has the retract, what did you call it?
track
Track
changes.
changes.
What is it?
The track changes, it'll show you.
Track changes.
So you'll see that, but what you read is section A in the existing law. And the person who decides it's a misdemeanor is, if the ethics board said what you did is so egregious, we're going to take it to the state's attorneys, we're going to file charges with the state's attorney, and then they prosecute it as a misdemeanor. And they realize, just like you realize, that that's a huge step. That's a little different. I mean, and the idea would be, I guess you could come up with some person that committed election fraud or campaign finance fraud that you would want that investigated. But that's the hammer. There's no fly swatter here. And I think that's where you need to be looking at. So A was kept in the law. It was just moved down to show that there was other options. If you wanted A out of the law, that's easy enough to do as well. So we'll get you the track changes version so that you can see it and you can let me know if you have any.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would just like to add a comment about the transparency fact with the self-funding.
Yeah.
If council decides to go that way, you basically affect who will run for office. That
and-
little,
right,
that
that's
little
something
bit
to
of money, by the time the bank fees you to death,
Right.
you don't have any money.
And that's what I was saying, is that
You
from a
can
practical
barely
standpoint, it's
buy
not,
signs
Right.
with $500.
right,
So I think that's totally,
right. From a
Not
practical
that-
standpoint,
it's-
it doesn't work.
it
no.
does not work.
Exactly.
And that's the basis of why you wanted this was there was the argument put forth that people won't run for office if they have to do all this.
Exactly.
So you came up
You're
with,
forcing people to have to get a
Right.
political
Right.
group behind them.
The new
raise
finding-
funds.
the new finding
People don't
authority.
want to do that.
Right.
The new finding authority is going to discourage people from running for office. If they know per infraction, you can be fined $500.
Well, I'd like to think that it would encourage
Only
honesty.
dishonest people.
Right.
It would encourage honesty, not discourage running for office.
Right.
I wouldn't give a committee of people in a small town the power to fine me $500.
Do you not have faith in people in a small town?
No, I think people are.
Because people in the small town who voted you in.
I think the only people to be concerned about that are people who have the intent.
We're pretty
to
closely
work
divided,
the system.
50-50 in the country. If you look at the local recent election, people have different points of view. And you can't always trust people to make impartial judgments if everything's subjective.
Councilman Frazier, can I ask a direct question to you? Because at the time that we had decided to allow the exemption for the self-funding candidate, you were one of the strongest proponents of that at the time.
I'm still in
So
favor of it.
you said a few minutes ago that you want everything to go through a checking account.
I
a
don't
campaign.
agree with Diane Foster that says that that would mess it up. My fees on local accounts are $2 to $15 only. That's a small portion of $500.
But the position that you're assuming effectively negates your previous position, and that's what I'm trying to get
It
at.
doesn't at all. You could still file and say that you're not going to fundraise through but you still need to track your contributions and expenditures through a form that allows backup information, like the documentation we talked about.
And
Changing it to all does not negate the exemption
It does, because
for
under
self-funding.
the
I don't
parameters of
agree
this,
with you.
you're still liable to have to provide documentation for your expenditures.
I agree with that.
Great talk. Moving on.
You should, I don't think.
All right,
self-funding-
let's see if we can do the amendment to the ethics ordinance in like fashion. Anybody have any questions on the amendment to the ethics ordinance? Good.
Hurry up, next.
Well, next we'll do Resolution 2018-13, which is the water allocation for December. Anybody have any questions on that?
No, sir.
All righty, let's move into the city manager's report. Jim, do you have anything to share with us tonight?
The draft capital projects 6-year plan will be on the table for you Monday night. Did not quite get the last few pages formatted and printed in time, so it'll be here Monday. We're going to push back the capital equipment probably until the end of the window. I don't think that's going to happen this month for sure. I did speak with the Sewells, just a quick update there. They're looking to partner with someone to try to come up with a concept that's marketable and somebody to help them determine the lot yield and things like that. So they're having some trouble finding somebody to work with to take that next step to try to come up with a concept to bring back to the city. So, you know, it may be a situation where the timing may not be right for them to annex based on the housing market and interests that they're finding from potential developers or potential partners. So they're, you know, right now they're of course in their busiest season with the tree farm, of course. So we probably will not hear anything, you know, moving forward on that for a couple months. Let's see. I do have just one quick thing. It's not really a project, but most of you know that we've been working towards participation in the National Flood Insurance Program for many years now. So as of this week, the final work on that is in the Department of the Environment's hands. So we expect that to be submitted to FEMA later this week, and we should hear something from FEMA within the next month. So I'm hoping by February we will have the good news that we are formally enrolled and that long journey is
Woohoo.
finally.
Wish I had some confetti. I'd throw it.
We came very close in 2016, and I don't know exactly why it stopped again at that point, but we adopted the resolution of intent.
I seem to remember something about maps, maybe, like there was some.
Right, and the FEMA maps became official and everything, but it just never made it that last little push. So that's in the state's hands and soon will be in the Fed's hands, and hopefully we'll get some good news by February on that.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, questions for Jim? Anybody have any questions in any of the department reports?
Mr. Mayor, on the Public Works report, Jim, I don't know if you can answer this. Number 5 and 6, the wastewater treatment plant. Okay, number 5 and 6, are these two items related to each other? Are we talking about the same permit?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so,
Number
in other words, MDE questioned the situation in 6, and we responded to them. I'm trying to decide, in other words, as of October 31st, the wastewater treatment plant had reached its permit limit. Now what? Do we go for another permit? Do we get our hands smacked? I mean, how does that work?
We have hit our total pounds limit because of all the
Right.
rainfall this year.
Okay,
So we will be violating our permit for the year.
that's what I wanted to know. Are we in violation?
We've requested a meeting with MDE. We're awaiting a response on that. And getting back to number 5, with regard to the permit, we have been going back and forth with MDE and working with the wastewater treatment superintendent, our consultant engineer, and comment letters are going back and forth between us and MDE. This week, we received their final comment. We were down to basically two points where there's a limit on the pounds of nitrogen we could discharge annually, and according to our, well, we were under that limit, but there is also a floating cap based on the flow numbers, based on the gallons that are processed through the treatment plant, and that is a per gallon type ratio, and we exceeded the limits on the per gallon, but we didn't exceed the total pounds annually. But MDE is saying that we violated because the language in the permit is the lower or the lesser of the two. And, there are also aspects related to the time period during which the plant was under construction for the ENR upgrade. And it gets very complicated as to the limits that are specified in the agreement with regard to what we're allowed to do during the construction phase and how that stacks up to the floating cap and the lesser of the two nutrient numbers. So there's been a lot of back and forth between the engineers, the superintendent, and the folks at MDE.
So, we were in violation.
Yes.
We could be fined.
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, is that calendar year, or how do they define a
Yeah,
year?
is
Like, are we
October the
nearing
end
the
of it?
end of that year, or
I think it is calendar.
calendar year?
I would have
Calendar
to check, and I'll let you know
Okay.
Monday for sure on that.
I don't want us to be 3 months in and already be in violation, have to go another 9 months like that, so.
You know, the comment that I wrote on that same section is consequences. And I guess
Yeah.
we're subject to fines, whether that'll occur or not is unknown at this point, is what you're saying, right?
Okay.
And we had actually requested to meet with MDE some time ago, and that we never heard back on that. So during this exchange over the permit, we reiterated that or repeated that request. So hopefully that's been forwarded on to the right folks.
I have a departmental
Okay.
report question,
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay?
We have a copy of the gazebo in our packet. It says down here at the bottom, it says it is recommended that the Sparks the Sparks bid be approved for this project. So I want to know if that's an action item, and are we going to vote on that bid?
Yes.
I wanted to call that to your attention, thank you, that was in the Parks and Rec Director's report this month.
It's a November 29th memo from Bob Mitchell.
We did have the bid opening for the gazebo project. There were 2 bids, vastly different prices. The low bid did not bid per the specification. So that's the gazebo that they proposed was not the one that was specified or, equivalent to what was specified in the bid package. So the other remaining bid also does fall below the budgeted amount for the project. And the fact that it's the amount that was budgeted was based on our engineer's estimate, again, based on the type of structure that we wanted to see in the park. And I did ask Bob to include a picture of the structure to give you an idea. I mean, it is a lot of money for a gazebo, but we wanted to see what.
Is this picture provided by Sparks?
This is
Their
this is
picture?
from the manufacturer's
Okay.
catalog. Sparks at Play is an installer for this particular brand of equipment and structure. It's a Polygon structure is the name of the company. So if
And this has electricity capacity in it?
yes,
I would
yes.
hope for that money.
So we would like to put that on for Monday night.
Okay, good.
Okay.
What I thought.
Any other departmental report comments?
Mr. Mayor, Council.
Yeah, I do have one more question. The cost to get electricity to it, will that be in addition to this? Because I doubt Sparks has their electricians that are going to dig trenches and bury wire and all of that.
That's all in the bid spec. They are responsible for the electrical outlets to be installed as well. So they'll sub that out.
Okay.
Okay.
And you may recall a couple months ago, we received one bid for the project, and we ended up rebidding. And the bid that we received the last time didn't meet the bid spec either. And you mentioned the electricity that was lacking in the last bid for the one bid we got. The other bid, the other project, the other structure didn't have the. It had, I think, an 8-foot eave height as opposed to the 10-foot that was specified. So just a different structure altogether.
Anyone else? Question, Jim, could you just very briefly talk about or relay our conversation the other day about the phone system and the possibility of replacing that, just so that we're aware of that?
We are looking at switching to a voice over internet protocol for our phone system. We had been going with essentially a reseller of the phone lines for several years. That company went out of business, and we had to default back to Verizon. And the phone plan that the police department had was a more reasonable price than what we're paying for City Hall, but that plan was no longer available for us. So Dan Dennis, our IT specialist, has been exploring telephone options for several months now, and based on the potential cost savings to move to this technology of voice over internet, we stand to save substantial money, and we'll have next month I'll have a summary sheet in the packets. This month we're still working out funding for buying the new phones themselves. We think we'd like to buy the equipment outright, and then the phone service is essentially like a monthly subscription. So we're going through the budget now, trying to identify where, if we have enough money in City Hall and the police department or IT to fund the equipment purchase, and then hopefully we'll be able to move forward with the agreement with Vaspian is the provider that we're looking at right now. So, and I know there's been some concern with the idea of what happens when the internet goes down.
That was going to be my question.
Right, and that kind of had put the brakes on the VoIP or voice over internet technology when it came up several months ago. But we basically can utilize our cell phones and deploy those in lieu of the regular phones in the event of an outage, and they can basically mirror the city phone line. So to the caller, it would be invisible. They wouldn't know they were talking to somebody on a cell phone. They would still dial 751-1100 and get somebody. It would just be on the cell phone instead of the regular phone. So we have a contingency plan, and we'll have a cell phone that will be able to be activated and accessible to the front office in the event that something did happen at the front. So
All right, thank you for that. Any questions for Jim? Further, all right, how about the legal report? Okay,
We've had a busy month with the Board of Zoning Appeals and plan to have a couple more busy months. The Board of Zoning Appeals on the 12th of November held their hearing, the reconsideration hearing on the Old Sheets property here for the packaged goods store, and after an adversarial hearing with several attorneys, they basically came up and they approved the use. So the packaged goods store received a special exception. It still needs to go to the Carroll County Liquor Board to get the change of location from the liquor license where it is to here. So that is where they went on that. Then on January 22nd, there is going to be another Board of Zoning Appeals hearing, and this one is on the Taneytown Crossing project. You're familiar with the Taneytown Crossing project out by Harney Road and 140. That project came back to the city after the Planning Commission several months ago did not recommend approval to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They came back, they changed some of the things around, did a different presentation. They are no longer asking for any variances. They are still required to have their special exception for the use of the garden apartment and the rental housing. And so the hearing on that will be on January 22nd. And at the last Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission recommended approval to the Board of Zoning Appeals for that. And Meads Crossing is also going to be coming to the Board of Zoning Appeals as well. Apparently, there is an issue with putting decks on the back of the townhouses. They can't get the minimum lot size, lot setbacks. So they're going to be coming in while they own all of them, so it's not individual owners, and ask for the variances in one batch so that people can have normal decks on the back of their house. That's the idea there. So that's the Board of Zoning Appeals, and the only other thing I have to report is while it may be December, it is election season upcoming. And so here are the dates that are going to be driving our next election. Election day for the town will be May 6th, 2019. And so from that day, we walk backwards, and our statute tells us how to do it, but absentee ballots will be available on April 15th. And the deadline to have candidates certified is April 8th. And what that means is after they file, they go to the ethics board and then the election board to make sure all the paperwork is correct. So we will know who the candidates are by April 8th. That is also the deadline for anybody who wants to vote in a city election. April 8th is the time you have to register, and you have to be a registered state voter, so you go register with the State Board of Elections. And the candidate nomination, should you wish to run for office, closes March 25th. So that would be the day that if you wanted to be a candidate, you had to have your nomination and the necessary forms, which are the financial disclosure forms and your campaign finance forms, in. The nomination notice is published March 4th. So between March 4th and March 25th is when the city would be accepting candidate nomination forms. So if you want to run for office in January, you just have to kind of wait until after the notice is done. And the mayor has until the February meetings to appoint the Board of Elections. So February 12th is the actual meeting night, I believe, that month. So that is the last day to appoint your Board of Elections for this cycle. So it'll be upon us momentarily.
all right. Just a comment, I'm very disappointed that Taneytown Crossing has moved forward to the Board of Zoning Appeals stage. It's unclear in some of the publications, but remember, this is the low-income housing that was proposed a couple months ago and turned down. Again, if you're uncertain that you want more low-income housing in town or not, it will behoove you to appear at this Board of Zoning Appeals meeting and voice your opinion. It's my opinion that we have plenty of low-income housing and don't need any more, and I'd rather have my tax dollars spent for other purposes than to enrich a developer. So
Is that the hearing on the 22nd of January?
22nd of January, yes. Anyway, that's editorial comments. But you'll hear more from me between now and then, I think. Old business. National Civil War Memorial update. Well, you know, last month I said we'd try to come up with a site that would be acceptable for this project, and Mr. Castile was with us this morning, and Nancy and Jim and we rode around, looked at a couple sites, and came to a couple pretty good locations, I think. One is owned by the town, the other is owned by a private individual. I don't want to really discuss the landowner's name at this point because we haven't received any kind of final commitment, but I did have an opportunity to meet with this landowner last week, and he was very much on board about the idea of the project and his ability to help. So I'm looking forward to being able to finalize this in the next few days or few weeks. I think once the site is selected, we'll be back to council and go over the complete details about what we have and what we propose and allow you to make those decisions. Again, I'm very excited about this. I just don't know how in the world anything bigger could come to Taneytown in my lifetime than this project. So we're very much eager to see this move forward. So hopefully things will work out. But either one of the sites I think is good. The Site A is better than Site B, but not much. So that's really clear. I know that.
Don't talk too
But
much about it.
but Site A is closer to the downtown, and that's what we're counting on, is to have this overflow come into our businesses and not worry about vacant store buildings anymore. So that's what'll happen, I think. Moving into new business, financial report. Anybody have any comments on the financial report? Hearing nothing, is there anything to offer on the accounts payable? Finally, we have Creekside Infrastructure, not finally, but next we have Creekside Infrastructure, a surety reduction. And Jay has a breakdown of that in his letter in the back of your council package, but anybody have any questions on that? Or Jay, do you want to make any comments on that?
On Monday, to do this, you'll need 2 votes. One will be to reduce the letter of credit. I have what's in there that already needs to happen, so it's going to be reduced and a maintenance bond will be placed. And the second vote will be to accept the infrastructure. The deeds have already been signed, and the infrastructure obviously is the roads, the water, the sewer, the lights, all the parcels the city's supposed to get, the stormwater parcel, the sewer pump station, all of those things. By doing that, we now accept that and operate them, meaning we pay for the electric, we pay for the repairs, we plow the snow, all the things. This is a way long time in coming, obviously. This has been since 2004 when they started to build. So they finally got their act together and everything is the way it needs to be. So the only odd part about this that is not normal for procedure is the fact that we are suggesting, and this includes, that the maintenance period only be 1 year. Normally, it's a 3-year maintenance period. And the argument which was made, it wasn't really an argument, was they have been maintaining this and the things have been in for years and years, that why would we have another 3 years to be maintaining the same things? So the 1-year period gets us the newest things. I mean, it gets everything, but it gets the newest things, meaning the sidewalk they just put in, the sidewalk in the back, and those types of things. So the acting city manager and I have been working on this and believe that that is probably in the city's interest to do and get this project closed out.
Anybody have any thoughts?
Jim's the city manager. That's my thought. Not the acting city manager.
He's the acting city manager. We didn't fix anything.
We did
Right.
last moment.
No.
We put him in
All
the
right.
stack.
Next is a kind of a different proposal, and I want to throw it out to you for your consideration. Each legislative session, Maryland Municipal League sponsors a reception for the delegates and the senators as they begin their new General Assembly session. And they ask us to, us municipalities, to help sponsor this by contributing some money toward the wine and cheese, I guess. And Taneytown has done this in the past, and we'll do it again this year. I have money in my budget to do that. And my thought was, actually it was Jay's thought, and I thought it was a good thought, is that this opening day of the legislature occurs on our workshop night in January. And you recall in past years that typically I and or Diane are away because we try to attend this thing. My thought is that maybe we should bag this workshop meeting and all of us go to the reception. Because we are a sponsor town, we'll get little sponsor badges to wear, and everybody will say, oh my goodness, you're a sponsor.
I'm sure that will be important.
What is the
for
date of it
15
in January?
minutes.
Do you have that date? Oh, the
As long
9th?
as the cheese lasts.
It just says it's canceled.
And anyway, if we could carpool down there, we could go down, we could spend, it's over at 7 o'clock, we'll be back here by 8:30. And I just would like you to think about that and see if we want to do that next month. But the real purpose of this is, because we're on the cusp of this National Civil War Memorial, I don't know of a better opportunity to be one-on-one with the legislators and let them know what we're doing and how excited we are about it. Because we're going to have to come to the state at some point, I'm sure, for help and support and encouragement and many other things. So I thought it would be just a good effort on our part, and it would certainly show solidarity on our part if we participated in the reception that way. So we'll decide to do that on Monday night if you will do that.
Is that something we would have to take a vote on to? Okay.
You should vote on it and then be clear the fact that you're not rescheduling that. You're just going to have one meeting like we did before.
We could handle the, the work session and regular meeting the following Monday night if we did do that.
I have another new business item. I would like to just ask if there's been any discussion with the town or actions about the rash of tire slashings on Daisy Court. I've had several people write me about it, talk to me about it, about extra police patrols and whether there are any suspects in this.
Well, Councilman Frazier, as you know, the chief emailed us all, I think a day or two ago, explaining that the police department was actively involved and aggressively investigating this, and that beyond that, you can't share any information because they're in the middle of an investigation. So anything like that would be improper.
Okay, well, there's a lot of angry citizens about it.
I am comfortable that the chief is on top of this, and I had the opportunity to speak with the sheriff yesterday, and this subject came up, and he offered any support that he could give, and I encouraged him to call Bill offer his support, so perhaps we, a little extra reinforcement, I don't know.
That's definitely troubling.
All right. Now we have time for some public comment pertaining to agenda items. Anybody care to make any comments on any of the items that were on the agenda tonight? When you come up, just identify yourself, and you have 3 minutes. Where you live?
All right, my name is Stephen Carney. I live in Harney, Maryland. I've grown up in this area. I'm very familiar with many of the folks here in the room tonight. I'm here to represent the Pipe Creek Civil War Roundtable, which is an organization based in this county that is dedicated to the historical preservation of the Civil War history within this area. I wanted to come forth as a representative of this organization to say that we are happy that you're moving forward with the National Civil War Monument, and we wanted to say that we support this effort. We believe that it's good for the area, we believe it's a good educational tool, and we believe that it's a good way to preserve our nation's history. So with that, I'll sit back down.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.
Anyone else?
Hi, Robin Frazier, Bentley Street. And I wanted to make a couple comments regarding the 2 ordinances. I am a strong believer in government transparency, and that's why I was compelled to have the courts rule on the June 22nd secret meeting where Judge Daniels found 4 or 5 violations of the Open Meetings Act. And now I've filed 3 complaints and will continue filing complaints on your meetings when you don't follow the Open Meetings Act.
Remember, Robin, this is supposed to be restricted to docket items.
Yes, I think you'll see how it ties together. And the Open Meetings Act was designed by the legislature to guide bodies like yours to make mistakes, not to make mistakes in this area. So please use the Attorney General's form. That'll help you to do that, and I encourage you to adopt that. But what's more important to the public than how each candidate spent their campaign finance dollars or whether a council member rents a room in his home is what their decisions are, how they come up with their decisions, and how they vote. Are they pro-individual property rights as they pledge in their oath of office to protect individual rights according to the Constitution of the United States of America, where men and women are supposed to be free? Are they protecting our rights to free speech, or do they use police to file criminal charges against those who exercise free speech? The public can discern the character of an individual when they watch them deliberate the issues and they vote. So the ethics ordinance, the purpose of an ethics ordinance is mostly to protect the elected officials from inadvertently finding themselves in a conflict of interest, which could be unethical. Ethics boards will rule on whether a certain business relationship creates a conflict of interest and how the elected official should handle it. It's best to address political conflict before it happens. That's the purpose of the disclosure form, so the ethics board can look at it and say that that might be a conflict of interest, and it helps you to know as an elected official that you should recuse yourself from certain topics. Liberals have started trying to use these one-sided financial disclosures, because they don't tell your whole picture, to come up with some negative sound bites to trash their opponents. That's not the purpose. It's not the purpose to look at those to see if you can find something to complain about your opponent about. So I just remind you of that. It's really to protect the elected official, not to find something transparent about the elected official to those who are going to vote for them or not. The best way to know if you want to vote for someone is to watch them as they deliberate. The campaign finance...
Brian, we've got time.
Well, it's a shame that you have 2 important ordinances at the same time, and you can't have enough time to address both of them. So I'll just write it and send it to you.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Marvin Flickinger again. I've heard mentioned tonight housing development proposed on the Harney Road, and then the one that's going on right now out the Littlestown Road. And we talk about the traffic that you're anticipating because of this memorial, if it happens. And we got to realize that Taneytown's not the only area that's growing, and Emmitsburg's going to grow too. And around through the countryside and a certain diameter, there's going to be houses built. I live here. I see the traffic in the morning. It's terrible. In the evening, it's terrible. What's the city of Taneytown doing with the county and state in an attempt to alleviate the need for a bypasser?
Well, again, I think the opportunity that the Civil War Memorial presents itself is probably the greatest opportunity we have to get the bypass off a dead center and moving forward. I really can't imagine any other project of lesser magnitude that would do that. So it's our hope to kind of tie these things together. Once we are rolling with the Civil War Memorial Project, it's time to approach the State Highway Administration and the folks in Annapolis and explain to them why it's important to be able to move traffic in and out of Taneytown in a timely fashion. So that's very much on the agenda as we look at this project. It's part of what we're going to be doing.
This sort of thing doesn't take place overnight. It takes planning. It might take 10 years of planning. It seems to me you'd be doing something right now, not wait for something that's done and then do it.
Well, I think in order to provide the proper emphasis, we have to have concrete plans in place to get the attention we're going to need to get this moved forward. So I think it's going to go hand in hand. I don't think one needs to be before or after, but in conjunction with the project. So it's very much on our minds and very much a part of how we can make this a success. Not only the Civil War Memorial, but the ability to move traffic. And you're very, very true about that. That's a real problem, and it needs to be addressed. You're right.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to have an administration in Annapolis that listens to complaints, because I've approached the state highway about the left turning vehicles coming in from Littlestown. They can go through multiple lights before they have a chance to make a left turn to come into town up to this location. And I think we should be proactive about fixing, as the gentleman said, some of these traffic problems that have come from all the new units that have been built.
Well, again, the issue with the left turn light off of York Street onto East Baltimore is
problematic.
It's going on. That discussion is going on along as the bypass discussion. And if you'll recall, or maybe you won't recall, but when Streetscape was in place, that was a real effort on our part, is to get that left turn lane. And State Highway just simply said, it can't happen. It's not. It'll slow traffic down. The left turn arrow would slow traffic down.
Well, when we all go down to Annapolis,
based on their studies throughout the state, and they did that in Emmitsburg at the time.
I know.
And it really fouled things up, and they stopped doing that. So.
Well, I think we could sing louder about it even currently, because it's a real problematic situation.
I look at it every morning. All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just tag on to that with regard to the left turn lane. As the Meads Crossing subdivision develops and builds out, it is anticipated that the traffic volume between that and the increased volume from the Meadowbrook development that's also under construction is going to trigger the need for that left turn lane on York and Frederick Streets.
I think the state will listen to us on that.
So that actually is anticipated at this point. The traffic levels haven't quite hit that level, but there are discussions of that coming within the next year or so.
Very encouraging.
Unfortunately, that will cause a loss of some downtown parking, on-street parking, because of the travel lane departure angles and everything that are the state highway specifications. So to some degree, we'd like to defer that a little bit until we come up with a plan to replace the parking that will be lost. But there is a plan to develop a turn lane, not a turn signal, but a turn lane to enable other motorists to go around to the right of those left-turning vehicles and allow for some stacking of the left-turning vehicles.
Thank you for that.
It's something that it's hard for citizens to understand. We really don't have much say about what happens on 194 and 140. It's state highway, it's their rules, we have to play by, talk about my way or the highway. I mean, that's literally true when it comes to the state highway. It's my highway, I'm gonna do what I want with it. That's the fact. And we can argue all we want, but anyway, anyone care to make a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, before you do, for Monday night, dates for the retreat?
Oh, yes, oh, yes, absolutely. Probably be a good idea to try to think about some time in late January, early February to reserve for our council retreat, simply because we should probably handle that before the election, in case there's some decisions that need to be made that we won't have to rehash when the new board comes in. So you'll have some numbers, some dates for us maybe, and then we can see if we have any conflict.
So everybody bring your calendars Monday.
Okay.
Oh, I don't want to forget, I wrote it down here and Diane pointed it to me, I would have forgotten it, is that Christmas tree lighting is this Saturday, only a week late, but nevertheless, it'll be just as bright and sparkly as it was a week earlier. Down at the police station at 5:30, not 6 o'clock, 5:30. There'll be a Relay for Life ceremony before the actual lighting of the tree. The tree will be lit somewhere around 6 o'clock. We expect a special guest to show up. And it'll be fun for all. Cookies and candy and singing and merriment and no snow. And that's all for us on Saturday. So make sure you try to come out for that. I always look forward to that. I enjoy that very much. And just a reminder to council, this Friday we have our employee Christmas luncheon. So you're all invited to attend that, and it means a lot for the employees if this council comes out to that. So if you can make it, I understand work schedules and so forth, but if you can make it, try to stop by the utility building and we'll have a festive time.
Randy's informed me that it's going to be Italian themed.
Italian themed.
Okay.
So,
Whoa.
lots of pasta.
That's all right. Randy always does a good job.
Yep, he does a great job.
And you're certainly welcome to look with that. And again, I just want to thank Judy for her efforts on these Christmas decorations.
Thank you.
She spent a lot of time, and her poor girls are probably wishing they didn't know her, but
They got their service hours.
that's right, they got their service hours. So anyway, now can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, good.